"You're too old for this company. Pack your things and leave," my new boss said, eyes glued to his phone like I was invisible. The whole office froze as I closed my folder quietly and stood up without a single complaint. What he didn't know, what no one knew, is that the investor meeting he felt so confident about would change everything. Because in less than 3 hours, he would discover the truth. The old man he had just fired was actually the majority shareholder of the company he thought he controlled. My name is Richard Thornton, and at 60 years old, I've learned that patience is the most powerful weapon in business. That Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle started like any other at Apex Solutions, the tech company I'd helped build from a 2-person garage operation 23 years ago. I arrived at 7:30, made my usual black coffee in the break room, and settled into my desk on the 4th floor, the same corner spot I'd occupied since we moved into this building in 2018. But today would be different, because today was the day Brandon Mitchell, our 32-year-old visionary CEO, finally crossed the line I'd been waiting for him to cross. Brandon had joined Apex 6 months earlier through what the board called a strategic acquisition of his failing startup, NextGen Dynamics. He'd burned through $12 million in venture capital in 18 months, had zero revenue, but somehow convinced our CFO, David Park, that his innovative approach was exactly what Apex needed to compete with the big players. I'd voted against the acquisition, but I was outnumbered 4-1. The other board members saw Brandon's Stanford degree and TechCrunch features as proof of genius. What they saw as confidence, I saw as arrogance wrapped in a designer hoodie and expensive sneakers. The first red flag came during his second week, when Brandon called an all-hands meeting and announced he was restructuring the old guard to make room for fresh energy. That was corporate speak for pushing out anyone over 50. Martha Rodriguez, our head of customer success who'd been with us for 15 years, was suddenly transitioned to a part-time consulting role. James Chen, our lead engineer who'd written 80% of our core codebase, was offered an early retirement package he couldn't refuse. One by one, the people who'd built this company were being erased, replaced by Brandon's friends from Silicon Valley who talked about disruption and synergy, but couldn't tell you the first thing about our actual customers. I watched it all happen from my desk, playing the role of Robert Thompson, senior financial analyst, a position I'd quietly held for the past 8 years under a carefully constructed identity. You see, after building Apex with my former partner Daniel Vasquez back in 2002, I'd made a decision that seemed crazy to everyone who knew. I stepped away from the CEO role in 2017, sold most of my public shares, and essentially disappeared from the company's visible leadership. The official story was that I'd retired to travel with my wife, Margaret Ortiz, and spend time with our grandchildren in Portland. What actually happened was far more strategic, and it started with a lawyer named Patricia Knowles and a shell company called Cascade Holdings LLC. Through Cascade Holdings, I'd quietly been accumulating Apex shares for years, buying them through private transactions, employee stock options that I purchased anonymously, and strategic purchases during market dips when others were panicking. The beauty of it was that SEC regulations allowed beneficial ownership to be hidden behind properly structured LLCs, and as long as I stayed below certain reporting thresholds in any single entity, I could operate in complete anonymity. By 2023, Cascade Holdings owned 41% of Apex Solutions. Combined with my personal holdings of 14%, registered under a family trust, and an additional 9% held by Margaret's retirement account, I controlled 64% of the company, and absolutely nobody knew. Brandon certainly didn't know as he strutted around the office that morning, barking orders at the junior developers and scheduling another innovation brainstorming session. That would accomplish nothing. I'd been documenting everything, every inappropriate comment, every questionable decision, every instance of age discrimination that HR somehow overlooked. My folder, the one I'd closed so quietly when he fired me, contained 47 pages of meticulously documented evidence, complete with email screenshots, witness statements, and financial records showing how his bold new initiatives had cost us $3.6 million in the last quarter alone. But I wasn't planning to use that folder for a lawsuit. No, I had something much more elegant in mind. The morning Brandon fired me started with an email he sent at 6:15 a.m., before I'd even arrived, announcing that today's investor meeting at 2 p.m. would reshape Apex's future, and that he'd be making some tough calls to position us for explosive growth. I knew exactly what that meant because I'd hacked into his calendar the night before. Turns out, using Stanford 2015 as your password is not as clever as you think. He'd scheduled a call with Goldman Sachs about taking Apex public, planning to pitch a valuation of $800 million based on its projected growth forecast that existed only in his PowerPoint presentations. The investor meeting was his stage, and he planned to announce his complete takeover of company operations. When I arrived that morning, I made a point of greeting everyone normally. Sarah at reception, Miguel in IT, Karen from accounting who always brought homemade cookies on Tuesdays. I wanted them to remember that I was the same calm, friendly Robert Thompson they'd always known. I had my coffee, checked my emails, and waited. Brandon arrived at 9:45, 30 minutes late for the executive meeting he'd called Uri, wearing a Patagonia vest over a t-shirt that probably cost $200. He didn't greet anyone, just breezed past reception while talking loudly on his AirPods about crushing Q4 to whoever would listen to his performance. The executive meeting was in the glass conference room on the 5th floor, the one we'd built with floor-to-ceiling windows specifically so leadership would be visible to the team, accountable and transparent. Brandon had turned it into his personal throne room, complete with a 65-inch monitor for his presentations and a no phones, our more policy that somehow never applied to him. David Park, our CFO, was already there, looking nervous as he always did these days. Amanda Foster, VP of Product, sat rigidly in her chair, and Tyler Santos, our head of sales, scrolled through his tablet with barely concealed frustration. I was the last to arrive, taking my usual seat at the end of the table. "All right, people, let's make this quick," Brandon started, not bothering with pleasantries. "Big day today? Goldman Sachs is joining the investor call at 2 DAS, and I want everyone aligned on the narrative." He clicked to his first slide. Apex 2.0, the future is now, in neon blue letters. We're going public by Q2 next year, and that means cutting dead weight. Our burn rate is too high, and too much of our budget is going to legacy costs, legacy systems, legacy processes, legacy people. He looked directly at me when he said that last part, a slight smirk playing on his face. I simply nodded, my expression neutral, my pen ready to take notes as I'd done in 100 meetings before. Brandon continued his presentation, throwing around buzzwords like AI-driven solutions, blockchain integration, and metaverse readiness, technologies that had zero relevance to our actual business of providing cloud-based project management software to mid-sized construction companies. Our customers were contractors in Phoenix and Denver who needed to track materials and schedules, not crypto bros looking for the next hype train. But Brandon didn't care about our customers. He cared about the story he could sell to investors who didn't know any better. 20 minutes into his presentation, he paused dramatically and turned to face me directly. "Robert, I'm going to be straight with you because I respect honesty." He didn't respect honesty, he respected the sound of his own voice. "You've been with this company a long time, and I appreciate your service. I really do. But the truth is, we need people who understand where technology is heading, not where it's been. You're 60 years old, man. You should be enjoying retirement, spending time with your grandkids, not trying to keep up with the pace of modern business." The room went silent except for Amanda's sharp intake of breath. I let the silence hang for a moment before speaking, my voice steady and calm. "Brandon, are you asking me to resign?" I needed him to say it clearly, on record, in front of witnesses. He couldn't help himself. The opportunity to play the decisive leader was too tempting. "I'm not asking, Robert. I'm telling you, you're too old for this company. Pack your things and leave. We'll have HR send your final paycheck and severance details by Friday." He said it without even looking up from his phone, already typing out his next self-important message to whoever would listen. The casual cruelty of it, the complete dismissal of 2 decades of work, was exactly what I'd been waiting for. I closed my folder slowly, the one with all that documentation I wouldn't need for a lawsuit, and stood up without a single word of protest. David's face had gone pale, Amanda looked like she might cry, and Tyler's jaw was clenched so tight I thought he might break a tooth. But I just smiled slightly, nodded once, and walked toward the door. Then I paused, my hand on the glass door handle, and turned back. "Brandon, one small thing before I go." He barely glanced up from his phone. "Yeah, what?" His tone was dismissive, already moving past the old man he'd just discarded. "Just make sure you're ready for today's investor call at 2 p.m. I have a feeling it's going to be quite memorable." I said it pleasantly, The way you'd remind someone to bring an umbrella because rain was forecasted. Brandon waved his hand dismissively. Don't worry about it, Robert. We've got everything under control. This is the big leagues now. You can relax knowing the company's in good hands. He actually believed that, and that made what was coming even sweeter. I nodded one final time and walked out of the conference room, feeling 47 pairs of eyes watching me cross the office floor toward my desk. The thing about working in the same place for decades is that people know you, really know you. As I started packing my things into a cardboard box, Sarah from reception appeared with tissues, even though I wasn't crying. Miguel from IT awkwardly offered to help carry anything heavy. Karen brought me not one but 3 cookies, stress baking apparently being her response to injustice. They all knew this was wrong, but they also knew they couldn't say anything without risking their own jobs. In Brandon's apex, loyalty was a liability, and speaking up meant you'd be next in the recycling bin with all the other dead weight. I took my time packing, my coffee mug with World's Best Grandpa that my grandson Lucas had given me, the picture of Margaret and me on our 40th anniversary cruise to Alaska, my lucky pen that I'd used to sign our first major contract with Redmond Construction back in 2004. As I worked, I thought about that contract, about how Daniel Vasquez and I had stayed up for 72 hours straight fixing a critical bug so we wouldn't lose that client. Daniel, my best friend, my business partner, the man who'd been more like a brother to me, had died of a heart attack 3 years ago at 59, just 2 months after his own retirement. He never got to enjoy the fruits of what we'd built together. I'd promised him, at his funeral, that I'd protect Apex, that I wouldn't let some Silicon Valley Shark Tank reject, tear apart everything we'd created. By 11:30, my desk was clear, my box was packed, and I was ready to leave. But I had one stop to make first, the legal department on the 3rd floor. Our general counsel, Rebecca Wu, was a sharp woman in her 40s who'd joined us 5 years ago from a major Seattle firm. She was one of the few executives who'd pushed back against Brandon's age discrimination, though always carefully and through proper channels. When I knocked on her door, she looked up from her computer and immediately knew something was wrong. Robert, I heard rumors. Did Brandon actually? She couldn't even finish the question, too appalled by the answer she already knew. He did, I confirmed, setting down my box and closing her office door behind me. Fired me in front of the entire executive team for being too old. His exact words were, "You're too old for this company. Pack your things and leave." Rebecca's expression went from shock to fury. That's textbook age discrimination under the ADEA. Robert E., we can bury him with a lawsuit. You have witnesses, clear violation of federal law, and… I held up a hand to stop her. Rebecca, I appreciate that, but I'm not interested in a lawsuit. What I am interested in is you attending today's investor meeting at 2 p.m. I need you in that room, as general counsel, to document everything that happens. Can you do that? She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Rebecca was smart enough to know that I wouldn't be this calm unless I had something planned. Robert, what's going on? You're acting like someone who just won the lottery, not someone who just got illegally fired. I smiled at her, the first genuine smile I'd allowed myself all day. Let's just say that Brandon's investor meeting is going to include some surprise attendees. I need you there as a witness and as our general counsel to handle the legal logistics of what comes next. Trust me, Rebecca, 2 p.m. is going to be very interesting. She agreed, though I could see the confusion and curiosity warring on her face. I thanked her, picked up my box, and made my way to the elevator. As the doors closed and I descended toward the parking garage, I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Patricia Knowles, my lawyer, confirming that all the paperwork was in order and that she'd be joining the investor meeting virtually at 2 p.m. The second call was to Margaret, letting her know that today was the day and that she should probably tune into the investor call live stream that I'd arranged to be recorded. The third call was to James Chen, our former lead engineer who'd been forced into early retirement, letting him know that his job was about to be available again if he wanted it. I spent the next 2 hours at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Apex building, a little place called Cornerstone Cafe that Margaret and I had been going to for years. The barista, Emma, a college student working her way through UW, made me my usual Americano and didn't ask why I had a box of personal items with me at noon on a Tuesday. I sat by the window, watching the Seattle drizzle that never quite becomes real rain, and reviewed my notes one final time. At 1:45, I paid my bill, left Emma a generous tip, and walked back toward Apex Solutions, ready for the meeting that would change everything. The investor meeting was scheduled for the main conference room on the 6th floor, our largest space, with seating for 30 people and a full video conferencing setup. Brandon had clearly gone all out. There was catered lunch from that trendy fusion place downtown, bottled waters with custom Apex labels, and a presentation loaded on the screen that probably took some junior designer all weekend to create. When I arrived at 1:58, carrying only my laptop and a thin folder, the security guard at the front desk, Marcus, who I'd known for 12 years, looked confused. "Mr. Thompson? I thought you... I heard that." He didn't want to say the word fired out loud. "I'm here for the investor meeting, Marcus. I'm an investor." It was the truth, after all, just not the complete truth. He nodded uncertainly, but let me through. He didn't have authorization to stop shareholders from attending investor meetings, and he definitely didn't know that I was the shareholder. I took the elevator to the 6th floor and walked into a conference room buzzing with energy. Brandon was holding court near the front, gesturing animatedly to two men in expensive suits, the Goldman Sachs representatives. No doubt, David Park looked like he might vomit from stress. Amanda and Tyler were reviewing notes in the corner. And then there was Rebecca Wu, who caught my eye from across the room and gave me the slightest nod. Everything was in place. Brandon spotted me at exactly 2 p.m., and his face transformed from confidence to confusion to anger in about 3 seconds. "Robert, what the hell are you doing here? I told you to leave. This is a closed meeting for investors and executives only." His voice had that edge of someone whose authority was being challenged in front of important people. I smiled politely and took a seat in the middle of the table. "I know, Brandon. That's why I'm here. I'm an investor." The room went quiet, that uncomfortable silence when people sense drama but don't know which way to look. Brandon's face flushed red. "You own what? Like 0.5% from some employee stock plan? This meeting is for serious investors, not 64%, actually." I interrupted calmly, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. "I own 64% of Apex Solutions through a combination of personal holdings, family trusts, and a company called Cascade Holdings, LLC, which makes me not just an investor, Brandon, it makes me the majority shareholder, the person who actually controls this company." I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table toward the Goldman Sachs representatives. That folder contains all the documentation, SEC filings, stock certificates, transfer records, all properly notarized and verified by external auditors at Deloitte. You're welcome to review them. The explosion of noise was immediate. David Park looked like he'd seen a ghost. Amanda's mouth literally fell open. Tyler started laughing, actual relieved laughter. The Goldman Sachs guys grabbed the folder and started flipping through pages, their expressions growing more serious by the second. And Brandon looked like his entire world was collapsing in real time, which it was. That's not possible," he stammered. "You're Robert Thompson. You're a financial analyst. You're nobody." The casual cruelty of that statement, the same dismissiveness he'd shown all morning, hung in the air. "Actually," I said, standing up so everyone could see me clearly, "I'm Richard Thornton, co-founder and former CEO of Apex Solutions. I've been working under an assumed identity for the past 8 years while quietly acquiring shares." Patricia Knowles appeared on the video screen at that moment. Perfect timing as always. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patricia Knowles, legal counsel for Mr. Thornton and Cascade Holdings. I'm here to confirm that all ownership documentation has been properly filed and verified. As of today, Mr. Richard Thornton controls 64% of Apex Solutions and is hereby exercising his rights as majority shareholder to call an emergency board meeting." She was all business, her voice crisp and professional. "Furthermore, Mr. Thornton is formally proposing a vote of no confidence in the current CEO, Brandon Mitchell, based on documented age discrimination, hostile work environment violations, and gross mismanagement of company resources." Brandon tried to salvage the situation, his voice rising in pitch as panic set in. "This is insane! You can't just waltz in here and—" "David, tell them this is crazy. Amanda, Tyler. We've been building something amazing here, and this old man wants to tear it all down because his feelings got hurt." But the room had shifted. David Park was already pulling up shareholder records on his laptop, confirming what he could see was true. Amanda was smiling, actually smiling for the first time in 6 months. Tyler had his arms crossed, watching Brandon squirm with obvious satisfaction. And the Goldman Sachs representatives were very carefully putting the documents back in the folder and closing their own presentation materials. "Mr. Mitchell," the older of the two Goldman reps said, his voice diplomatic but firm, "I think perhaps we should reschedule our discussion about the IPO until Apex's ownership situation is clarified." That was banker speak for, "We're running away from this disaster as fast as possible." They stood, shook hands with me, not Brandon, and left the conference room with the kind of speed that comes from years of escaping bad deals. Brandon watched them go, his face cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine: anger, confusion, fear, denial, and finally, the dawning realization that he'd just lost everything. "The board meeting is scheduled for 4 p.m. today," Patricia continued from the screen. "All board members have been notified. Mr. Thornton, as majority shareholder, will be presenting evidence of Mr. Mitchell's unsuitability for the CEO position, including but not limited to systematic age discrimination resulting in the illegal termination or forced resignation of 7 employees over the age of 55, financial mismanagement resulting in $3.6 million in losses over the past 6 months, creation of a hostile work environment documented by HR complaints that were ignored, and violation of company bylaws regarding executive authority and decision-making processes. The board will then vote on Mr. Mitchell's termination and removal from all company positions." Brandon finally found his voice again, but it was smaller now, stripped of all that artificial confidence. "You planned this? You set me up? You let me fire you so I could document your pattern of discrimination?" "Yes," I confirmed, not unkindly. "Brandon, you fired me this morning for being too old. You did it casually, cruelly, in front of witnesses, without even bothering to look up from your phone. That was the last piece of evidence I needed. But the truth is, you've been setting yourself up since the day you arrived. Every toxic decision, every good employee you forced out, every dollar you wasted on vanity projects, I documented all of it because I knew eventually you'd go too far. You made it easy." Rebecca Wu stepped forward at that moment, her role as general counsel finally making sense. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to need your company laptop, access cards, and any other Apex property in your possession. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending the board vote at 4 p.m. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal items, but all company files, documents, and digital assets remain Apex property. Do you understand?" It was the corporate equivalent of a perp walk, and I could see the reality finally sinking in for Brandon. He'd walked in here thinking he owned the world, and he was walking out with nothing. As security, Marcus and his colleague Jennifer arrived to escort Brandon out. He turned to me one last time. "I don't get it. Why? If you owned the company, why work as some low-level analyst? Why hide? Why let me think I had any power at all?" It was a genuine question, probably the first genuine thing he'd said all day. I considered my answer carefully because despite everything, there was a lesson here worth teaching. Because Brandon, real power doesn't need to announce itself. I worked as Robert Thompson because I wanted to see the company from the ground level, understand what employees really needed, stay connected to the actual work that matters. And I let you think you had power because I needed you to show everyone who you really were. Words can be disputed, but actions speak for themselves. The board meeting at 4 p.m. was exactly as efficient as I'd hoped. All 5 board members attended: myself, David Park, Amanda Foster, Rebecca Wu, and our external board member, Susan Martinez, who'd been with us since 2015. I presented my evidence in a clear, organized manner: 47 pages of documentation, witness statements, financial records, and recorded instances of discrimination. The vote was unanimous. Brandon Mitchell was terminated for cause, effective immediately, with no severance package and no stock options. The company he thought he'd controlled for 6 months was done with him in less than 6 minutes. But we weren't finished. Over the next hour, we made additional decisions that would reshape Apex's future. James Chen was offered his position back as lead engineer, with a formal apology and back payment of the pension contributions he'd lost. Martha Rodriguez was brought back as Chief Customer Success Officer with expanded authority. Every employee who'd been forced out or pressured to resign due to age discrimination received calls that evening offering reinstatement with full back pay and benefits. By 7 p.m., the old guard VF that Brandon had tried to erase was being rebuilt, and the company was already feeling different. Better. I addressed the full company the next morning at an all-hands meeting. this time as Richard Thornton, not Robert Thompson. I explained everything: why I'd hidden my identity, how I'd been documenting the changes, and what we'd done to correct course. I apologized to everyone who'd been hurt by Brandon's tenure and made a promise. Apex Solutions would be a company that valued experience and wisdom, that treated people with dignity regardless of age, and that measured success not by buzzwords and hype, but by the real value we created for our customers. The applause was long and loud, and I saw tears on more than a few faces. The hardest conversation was with Margaret that evening, over dinner at our favorite restaurant in Ballard. "So, no more pretending to be a financial analyst?" she asked, with that knowing smile she'd perfected over 42 years of marriage. "No more Robert Thompson." I shook my head. "No more hiding. I proved what I needed to prove, that the company could survive, that the culture we built was real, and that people like Brandon can't destroy something solid just because they're loud and confident." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Daniel would be proud of you. Protecting what you built together, doing it the right way, that's what he'd have wanted." Brandon tried to sue, of course. 3 weeks later, we received notice of a lawsuit claiming wrongful termination, defamation, and breach of contract. Patricia Knowles handled it with the kind of efficiency that comes from having all the facts on your side. She sent Brandon's lawyers a folder containing every documented instance of discrimination, every email, every witness statement, and a calm letter noting that we'd be happy to see them in court where all of this would become public record. The lawsuit was quietly dropped within a week. Last I heard, Brandon was in Austin trying to raise money for another startup, though his reputation had taken the kind of hit that Google never forgets. As for Apex Solutions, we didn't go public. Instead, we refocused on what we did best: providing excellent software and service to construction companies who trusted us with their businesses. Our revenue grew 18% in the next year, customer satisfaction scores hit all-time highs, and employee retention improved so dramatically that we were featured in a Harvard Business Review article about age-diverse workplaces. I officially took back the CEO role, but made it clear this was temporary. My goal was to mentor the next generation of leaders, people like Amanda Foster who understood that innovation comes from wisdom and experience, not just youth and noise. 3 years later, at the age of 63, I did actually retire for real this time. Lucas, my grandson who'd given me that coffee mug, had just graduated from college with a degree in computer science, and I was ready to spend my days watching him build his own career, traveling with Margaret, and maybe, just maybe, starting a consulting practice to help other founders protect the companies they'd built from people like Brandon Mitchell. The day I handed over the CEO role to Amanda Foster, she pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. "You taught me that power isn't about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can stay calm the longest." Looking back on that Tuesday morning when Brandon fired me for being too old, I realized that age was never the real issue. The issue was respect. Respect for experience, respect for the people who build things, respect for the difference between confidence and competence. Brandon saw a 60-year-old man and assumed he saw weakness, obsolescence, something to be discarded. What he didn't see was patience, strategy, and the kind of long-term thinking that comes from decades of watching patterns repeat themselves. In the end, he wasn't defeated by my age. He was defeated by his own arrogance, and I just happened to be in the right position to document it. So, if there's a lesson in all of this, it's simple. Never underestimate the quiet person in the corner taking notes. Never assume that power announces itself with expensive sneakers and TechCrunch articles. And most importantly, never, ever fire someone for being too old without first checking exactly who they are. Because sometimes, the old man you just dismissed is actually the one who holds all the cards, and he's been waiting patiently for you to make exactly that mistake. Brandon Mitchell learned that lesson the hard way, in front of Goldman Sachs representatives in less than 3 hours, just like I promised him it would happen. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of poetic justice that makes patience worth it. If this story of justice and strategic revenge resonated with you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because we share stories about people who refused to be victims and found their own way to even the score. And speaking of justice delayed but not denied, you need to check out our previous video about the man who was kicked out of his own house by his wife while he was seriously ill. only to discover she'd already moved another man into their home. He was devastated, broken, and humiliated. But what she didn't know was that he had one final card to play that would change everything. Click on the video on your screen right now, because that story will leave you speechless. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They're usually the ones writing the ending.